G'day and welcome to the Grow a Small Business Podcast. I'm your host, Troy Truen. Each week, we speak with an owner who has grown a business with 5 to 30 team members to something bigger. Diving into their numbers and unearthing the pain they've experienced, we explore what they did to overcome each barrier and what they would do differently from day one. Let's get into it. Welcome everyone. Today I'm interviewing Michelle Gallaher from Opal in Melbourne, Australia. Thanks for your time this morning, Michelle.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And how we know each other, Peter, our podcast editor, reached out and asked you to come on the show. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me. It's great.
Tell our audience a bit about your business, what it does, how it makes money.
Sure. The business is called Opal. We're listed on the stock exchange. We're a microcap and we work at the intersection of social media, clinical trials and artificial intelligence. And we do two things. We solve the problem of recruiting people into clinical trials, and this is new drugs, new devices. And we solve the problem of mining social media for data that help inform healthcare strategy and forward, development of new products and services for healthcare organisations.
Wow, that sounds really interesting. I remember reading years ago, data from Google searches was being used to help predict, the spread of the flu throughout America. So it's quite powerful to be able to tap into that data. That's one of the things that you guys are able to do to mine the social media comments, etc.
That's right. Yeah. And it's kind of like, I think of it like a bit like Hansel and Gretel, where you follow a trail of breadcrumbs. So every time we click, every time we Google something, or every time we share something, we leave these tiny sort of breadcrumbs around what we think and how we feel. And that sort of stuff is really important in really understanding the real lived experience of patients that are managing diseases or injuries. But it also really helps technology developers in the healthcare sector really understand what patients want and then knowing what that unmet need is. So for the first time, it's bringing patients' voices into new development. And that's kind of exciting. And it's a bit crazy that patients haven't been involved before in developing new healthcare technologies or clinical interventions.
Yep. Yeah. And so how then do you monetize what you do?
Yeah, so we've got a couple of levels. So we work as a consulting business. So first of all, it's generating revenue from writing strategies and doing market research, really. And then the second level of the business is we're building platforms in which we can sell an enterprise solution to a business or an organization, and they can buy a seat at the platform and they can use the platform themselves. So more of a passive income that we're developing there.
Yep, great. And maybe talk a bit how the business started out.
It's a really interesting history. It's one of those great success stories, and then there's a few car crashes along the way, which I think makes for, isn't that the life of small business?
That's
isn't
right.
that the life we're all leading right now? That from one week to the other, like I can tell you, there was a car crash on Monday our business, and then there's been a great success yesterday. So it's been one of those wild typical weeks. But the business is an interesting iteration. I started a business in 2014 called The Social Science, and it was about doing social media and writing content for the healthcare industry. So I've spent nearly 25 years in biotechnology and pharmaceuticals. So this was a real niche. And so I left a big corporate job to go whitewater rafting in small business in 2014. And then in 2018, 3.5 years later, I sold the business into a listed company, which was called ShareRoot. So I think you can understand why I eventually changed the name of that business.
Yes.
But this was a listed company. It was a marketing technology company. They really wanted to be in the healthcare sector, and they had access to artificial intelligence, and that's what I wanted. So we sold 3.5 years down the track, took a bit of cash, took some equity, and jumped into a whole different ball game as a listed company.
Right. Yeah. And so you've obviously stayed on, and are you the head cheese now?
I am. Yeah. So I did stay on. So for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, for ugly or not,
Yep.
I've stayed on. So that was part of the deal when I sold the business. So I agreed to stay on as general manager. So the chief executive was based in the US. So it was a US based business. And it was a loss-making business. It was a typical small cap biotech where they were spending a huge amount of money on research and making no money. There was no revenue. So I was the revenue. They bought revenue in buying my business. So I agreed to stay on. So I had a very clear agenda that I wanted to really move into the artificial intelligence healthcare space. And these guys were going to let me do that. But the benefit was they got to keep the revenue and a very impressive client list when they bought my business. So the period of time I agreed to stay was 2 years. And then within that 2-year period, there was a significant strategic move in the business. Chief executive left. There was a brand new board, new chairman, and I took over as chief executive. So people cheekily said, "Oh, so you know this was all planned, Michelle." I can tell you, it was not planned. It was not planned.
Yep. Great. Yeah. And maybe talk a little bit about the AI side of things, because I think the audience would be keen to hear, how that works and what the attraction is there.
Thanks for asking. This is the best part of our business.
And we've only got
this
about
is
an hour.
I'm glad you said that because
I know you could talk for a week on this.
I could talk underwater about this. So the great thing is artificial intelligence is really not as difficult as people think. So really what most of it does is it just takes a whole lot of data and it puts it into groups and it looks for patterns. And it's just the stuff that we normally do with our brains and our eyes every day. It's just this is a computer program doing it, and you can train it to look for certain patterns. And then after a period of time, it starts to learn and it starts to see patterns where humans don't see patterns. And then you've got to keep the training going. So this part of our business takes a huge amount of data from kind of anywhere, and it turns it into a probability of success score or a predictability score. So what we're doing at the moment is we're taking all of the data from things like all of the COVID-19 clinical trials that are registered through the US government. And you can see a lot of data that's in a very public space about these trials. And we're training our algorithm to work out which one's going to win.
Wow.
So it's a pretty exciting space. And so I'm sure that you've got loads of listeners out there that know something about AI, and then there would be a whole bunch of people that just know nothing about AI. So don't get excited about the term artificial intelligence. It's kind of not that exciting.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like playing, isn't it, technology bingo? Oh yeah, I've got blockchain, I've got artificial intelligence, I've got big data. It's like, come on, let's get serious. So these things are only as good as you train them. They're a bit like Labradors that you and I have. These dogs are only as good as you can train them. So they reflect their owners. So yeah, that's what we're trying to do at the moment. So we're trying to improve clinical trials. We're trying to predict the outcome of clinical trials. So governments and investors can make better decisions and technology developers. But we're also very carefully listening to social media about healthcare and then using artificial intelligence to group and find patterns in that.
Right. Yeah. Well, you must be
it's not that hard.
No. You must be very popular at the moment, or I think you said before we started recording, you had a big write-up this week in The Australian about the COVID work you're doing.
Yeah, we're kind of popular and not popular because what we're doing is thinking the unthinkable. And so because my background in the innovation industries, this is it's actually a really well-documented process to think the unthinkable and have this discontinuous ideas flow. So the healthcare industry, particularly around clinical trials, is very, very conservative. So they've been doing it the same way for 60 years and they don't like people coming in shaking the tree. So straight away, we've made a lot of people very uncomfortable because a degree of what we do can be seen as taking over someone's job.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's augmenting, as it often is in these kind of conversations. So we're kind of popular because everyone wants to see the result of what we do, but it's also uncomfortable because people sort of sitting back going, you can't do that.
Yeah. Yeah, it must be a real predicament at the moment because obviously everyone's eager to get a vaccine out as soon as possible. And you hear it on the news, it takes years and years to get one to market. And they're talking about fast tracking it as best they can. It must be quite a interesting and stressful time in your area.
Yeah, look, it is. And because of my background, we know that it typically takes between 10 and 15 years to develop a new drug to get it from start to finish on market. And we know that 95% of them fail in clinical trials. So listening to the public dialogue around vaccine development and clinical trials just makes my toes curl
Yep.
because it's so far from reality. It's not funny. The good news is though that we are seeing a lot of processes being fast tracked and revolutionized because of COVID. So there's been some wins here. But there's also a lot of hope in the drug therapies that are being developed. So this is not the vaccines. This is drugs that would be used to treat COVID at very different stages. There's a lot of fast track development happening here, and these will come through probably sooner than a vaccine, and I'd probably put more faith in them than the vaccine. Yeah, so maybe I can tell you a bit about the pivot. So this has been a really interesting experience, and I often say that our poor bloody shareholders have whiplash because every time I get talking, they think, "What's she going to say next?" It's important to understand that when I sold my business into ShareRoot, it was a social media consultancy, and I had an ambition to move towards artificial intelligence. And then with a significant shift in the board and the leadership level, it kind of happened. But it meant that we had to take a business, do a very quick strategic review, look at our technology and all of our intellectual property, work out what the market need was. And we didn't have much time to do that pivot. So shareholders were pretty frustrated at the history of the business, and fair enough too, because it had been pretty frustrating for all of us inside the business. But that was a really important change point. We were at that crossroad where we had a couple of choices. We could have stepped away and shut the business down, or we could have gone full steam ahead what we were already doing, or shift into this new space. And I learned so many lessons about speed and about taking people with you on that, about communicating properly, particularly managing up in that communication as well as managing down. I had to shut down the entire US operation, which was, I think for any business owner, when you've built a business, it feels just awful tearing something down, even if somebody else has built it.
Yes.
But it was a really fast-paced time, and it was difficult to navigate, but it was incredibly, I guess, energizing to really find our new strategy and the new direction.
And what kind of time frame are you talking about? This giant pivot happened over
Yeah,
how long?
the pivot time frame was probably, it began in the May, and that pivot started with a new chairman. So I had to really lobby for the chairman that I really wanted to be able to take the business forward. I rewrote the business plan over 2 weekends. But it had been percolating in my mind for probably about a year and a half. So it's not like it just happened in a split second. And then once we'd done the technology review and started the pivot, the whole thing was done in about 7 months.
Holy shit, that is a really short time frame for such a, complex and big business.
Yeah.
Well done. And when did you finish that pivot? Was that last year?
The pivot actually finished in late November last year when we changed the name of the business from ShareRoot to Opal. So even though many people saw that as the beginning of the new business, for us it was the end of a very significant period, and not quite the beginning, but it was publicly the beginning of the new business and the end of the pivot.
Yeah, great. And when you started in 2014, how old were you when you started out?
Oh, how old was I when I started out? This is a funny story. So when I started my own business, I was 48. So I come from a whole family of entrepreneurs, and I'd always had this thing. I always used to say, I'm never going to own my own business because I saw my mum and dad do it and they worked their guts out, and I would never do that to my kids. And so when I went to my mum and dad one Friday night and said, I'm leaving my big, fat, healthy corporate job and I'm going to start my own business, my mum said, you're an idiot. What are you thinking? And dad said, what took you so long? So, Yeah, it was a bit of a funny story. And I think if you ended up with my daughter on this call, she would say, oh, I would never own my own business. I would never do that to my kids. So I bet you my kids will say that now for the next
Yeah.
40 years until they start their own business.
That's good. And do you have some key numbers you can share to illustrate the growth of the business over the 6 years?
Yeah, and I think this is really interesting. So when I started the business, we bootstrapped it, and we bootstrapped it with absolutely no capital injection whatsoever. And I just want to add in the, full transparency and honesty, I had a massive mortgage. So I don't know what I was thinking when I started it, but I think all good business starts with a fair, healthy dose of naivety. But I would recommend don't start with a huge mortgage or a lot of personal debt. But in that first year, it was really exciting because there was only the two of us in the business. It was my business partner and I, and we had revenue of $311,000 in that first year. And like both of us, that wasn't even both of our salaries put together, but we were so excited. And we had a net profit of about $80,000. It was $79,600. And that we just thought we were just hot shit. We thought we were in a bit. So then as we sort of went through, the revenue went up by probably about, 120,000 a year until 2017. So it was sort of going up in a fairly healthy way. But when you look at the net profit, we were doing quite a lot of investing. So in the second year of the business, we had net profit of about $22,000 because we'd started to take on staff and we bought tools and started to invest. So it was sort of interesting how it flowed around. But when you look at it, it was healthy growth for 4 years, for 3.5 years. It was really healthy revenue. But I guess one of the big things I learned was just, as the business got bigger, the net profit didn't necessarily get bigger, but the problems certainly did.
Yeah, of course. And that net profit, that is after you and your business partner were paying yourself a wage?
Yeah, in the first year, we paid ourselves $26,000 each, which was crazy because we were coming off salaries. I was on a salary of about $220,000. So that didn't help. So we had to have some serious conversations around the mortgage with the bank manager. But in that second year, then we started to pay ourselves $60,000 each. And it was getting a little bit healthier. But that's really hard to live in that sort of space when you're not paying yourself a healthy wage. We prioritized in the second year, we took on 2 employees. And by the third year, we had 7 employees.
Yep.
And we prioritized the payroll around them. And there was some significant mistakes around that just in terms of our mental health and just our ability to live well within our families. But, these are the choices we make. And I'm sure lots of your listeners would feel the same way. The weight of responsibility around making payroll. There were some years, it was about 6 times I had to draw down on my mortgage at the time to make payroll. So we became really, really focused around cash flow. But when you're in a consulting business, you can only sell time and you've only got so much of it. And it's incredibly difficult to scale a consulting business when you're just selling time.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to give the audience some context on what you were paying yourself in that first year, the minimum wage in Australia is about $38,000 a year. So you were paying yourself well below the minimum wage.
Yeah, I know. I could feel it too.
It is a common...
simple things like, you have a car breakdown and it becomes catastrophic.
Yeah.
Or if one of you gets sick, that becomes a real issue. I did borrow money from parents, which that's not ideal when you're nearly 50 years old and you're supposed to be the grown up. It's things like that just took a huge toll on us. And that was one of my greatest lessons was I think if I could do it all again, I would have got an investor right at the start to come in with us. We didn't even properly consider a business loan. And I think we could have serviced that and we could have managed that quite well. But I think I was quite arrogant actually and quite aggressive in thinking, I could bootstrap this. It's going to be profitable from day one. But there's profitable and then there's profitable.
Yeah, I mean, it's a common ploy or strategy to pay yourself low in the first few years, build it up, etc. And also, a lot of us starting out are, like you said, arrogant or naive or both, and we don't want to sell any of our equity or give it to anyone else because we're equity precious. But to de-risk it, take some of the risk off the table, and make sure that you've got enough cash going in to run the home can add a tremendous amount of value because of that pressure it takes off your stress and your mental health, and you perform better, obviously, for that. So it's really an interesting conversation I have with a lot of people thinking of starting up or starting to seriously grow, that you should consider that path of selling some equity to give yourself some financial breathing space.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the other thing that I would do again is I had two very good mentors, peers that were in the space sort of around me, and one of them recommended that I should put together an advisory board,
Mm-hmm.
and that maybe consider whoever you put on that advisory board is obviously, even if it's a short-term investor. And I dismissed it because frankly, I think, I was a bit greedy and thinking, no, I could do this on my own,
Yeah.
and I could lift it on my own. I want to also say that I'd worked for large organisations. I'd never worked in a small business before,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd never worked in a consultancy or an agency before. So, in hindsight, I was really blind as to what the real skills were and what the real risks were around this.
I think it is difficult. Sorry, I think it is difficult when you have that downshift from big corporate. I mean, I worked at PricewaterhouseCoopers for 3 years. It was, they merged. I started at Pricewaterhouse, and halfway through my 3 years, I merged with Coopers and Lybrand to become the biggest accounting firm in the world.
Mm.
And it's very different, as you know, when you then step down into running a small business and your own business. So many things, you've got to change the way you think, the way you act, on so many levels.
Yeah, I know it's both ways, isn't it? So my father had been in his own business. I'm a first generation Australian, and he was great because he was in an engineering business, and so we'd sort of grown up around dad and seeing the way mum and dad worked together in mum had businesses as well.
Mm.
And so I had some small business acumen, and one of my greatest assets was having my parents as mentors, and my
Yeah.
brother, and and my cousins who are all in their own businesses. I think there's very few of us in my family that actually work for anybody but themselves. And that was really great to have. But I was that person who grew up in pharmaceutical companies and, big universities and big, highly matrixed organizations. I'd never really had to worry about cash flow. Not
Mm.
really. I'd
So I was
had
going to,
P&L responsibility, but not
yeah.
really about making payroll.
Well, I was going to ask, if you had such experience and support through your family with small business, how did you fuck the startup?
Yeah, I know that's still an issue that my dad and I are unpicking.
All right.
Um, it was, we survived, and I think we got to the point where we sold the business into ShareRoot. I think my friends and mentors in this space were probably quite incredulous that I'd
Yeah.
managed to convince someone to buy my business. Um,
Yeah.
and there was a part of that. But when we sold the business, we had revenue of nearly 700,000, and we had net profit, retained earnings of about 193,000 that year.
Yeah.
So it was actually quite a smart little business, and it was quite lean.
Yeah.
And we were just working with clients that found us. We'd done no outbound marketing whatsoever. This was all based on professional networks and reputation. So it
Great.
was kind of nice. But yeah, there was a critical point in the middle where my business partner got very, very sick, and I had to take the whole lot over by myself
Mm.
over the course of a weekend. And then he never came back into the business as an active partner. He was always passive after that. So the whole lot was carried on my shoulders. And that was okay. But yeah, if I'd not had, I guess, my family around me that knew the nuts and bolts of business,
Yeah.
Dad literally came into the office one afternoon and he said, "What the fuck is going on?" And he was not happy. He was
Yeah.
like, "What is?" Because he was also really concerned about me and my
Yeah.
health.
Mm.
and my kids or his grandkids and, you know, what was going on. And Dad was absolutely bloody brilliant.
Yep.
And even though he knew nothing about our business, he knew the fundamentals
So he
of,
was asking you
you
those
know,
hard
making
questions.
sure he was really holding my feet to the fire.
Yep.
And, you know, then he met with me every week for about 6 weeks, and we just talked through numbers. We talked through survival tactics. We talked through, you know, how do we ensure that this dip, and it was a dip, but at the time it felt like a crisis with a partner getting sick. And then having that period, and that's with the period where we couldn't meet payroll. And that was just that, right, you're right, suck it up, princess, and stop being a whinger about this. You're either going to sink or swim, and you're not goddamn well going to sink, not with my grandkids on board. So that, you know, it's nice to have that, but also recognize a lot of small business owners just don't have that. And that's where community and professional networks are so important around small business.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we finish off the key numbers on growth, what was the timing of your business partner kind of getting sick and not coming back? Was that before you got bought out?
Yeah, it was before we got bought out, and it was one of the critical reasons why I chose to sell too. So he got really sick. It was 2017. It was April 2017. It was the 28th of April. I can tell you the exact day because it's just seared into my mind.
Yeah.
And then I started negotiating and looking, because this was around the consideration: do we get out? Do we keep going? You know, what do I do? Do I just jump out and go and get another corporate job? But we started talking to, which turned out to be Share Route, but we were talking to a number of potential interested buyers probably from about the August. And then things got really intense probably around about the October. So that was kind of exciting. And that's when I won the Victorian Telstra Businesswoman of the Year award for Victoria. So that kind of helped. And then the price went up.
Yeah, of course.
So that was nice.
And congratulations on that award. It's a huge award here in Australia. Yeah, very well done. And so when did the sale occur? Was it, did you say early 18?
Yeah, so the actual sale occurred in April 2018. So it was virtually a 12-month process from my partner getting sick through to the sale of the business.
And
we started getting in... Sorry, I was about to say we got
into a term sheet sort of around
December 2017. So we were more or less not locked into the sale, but we were locked into the sale process from December.
And when did you start looking for suitors? Was that August?
No, it was probably about June. So it was just as we were sort of finishing the end of financial year. And look, it was a nice little business at the time. We had revenue of about 500,000. We had a net profit of about 112,000. And at that point in time, we had 5 employees. And that, when my business partner got sick, I retrenched a couple of people and tightened the belt. And just to ensure that we had that financial sustainability over the next sort of period. And then it was just that little bit of soul searching of, well, I don't want to do this on my own. I don't want to go the course in the same direction. And now's as good a time as any to pivot. And again, it was just having really good professional networks in the space that I was able to talk to a few trusted mates and said, you know, this is the direction. And when I actually said this to my dad, he said, no, you don't sell businesses and you don't sell houses. And I said, no, Dad, I think you're wrong this time. I think this is the best decision for me. And Dad said, oh, well, you know, all right, spin the dice and see how you go and see who's interested. And then it turned out there was quite a few people interested.
That's great.
So, it was a good outcome from that point of view.
And because it was a listed company, are you able to disclose what the purchase price was and how they valued the business? Was it top line, bottom
so
line?
It's all public. So you can Google this. So in the end, they valued it as $1 million business. So at the time that I sold it, the revenue was sitting about 507,000 in 2008 when we finished the year. And this was just after the sale. We brought in 700,000 in revenue that year. And we had net profit of 193,000. So we're in a nice little healthy spot right there when we sold the business. So it was 500 in cash and 500 in equity. And then the equity was unlocked in the next 2 years when certain revenue targets were met.
Yeah. And so were they valuing it 5 times net profit or top sales?
Top sales. So it was like 2 times, not even 2 times. in
Not even
that.
2 times top line.
But,
Yeah.
you know, it's hard to value these businesses because they weren't looking at the social science as just as a revenue generating opportunity. The fact is, we had a client list that they desperately wanted to tap into, but it was also, I was bringing, I guess, a strategy and an idea for a future direction of how they could use their base technology and leverage it into the healthcare sector. That's where the real value was. So it wasn't just the business they bought, I guess they bought me.
Yeah, an acqui-hire.
Yeah, acqui-hire, that's good. I haven't heard that before.
Well, to close out the key numbers, so anything else to finish the journey with the top line, the sales, and then maybe talk about FTE going from 2 to what you are now, and give the audience some perspective?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, when we went into ShareRoot, the first thing we did was we invested quite a bit more money into the business. So when you look at our revenue from the point of sale of 2018 to where we are now in 2020, our total revenue is not really growing that much. So we're only sitting now at about 800,000 a year in revenue, but the upside for Opal is in the value of the intellectual property at the back end, which has significant scale potential. So we've shifted from a very much a revenue services business now, sort of pivoting into building out an intellectual property portfolio. And the focus of the business is not so much on that services revenue anymore. It's really about investing in the upside of the technology. The other second thing we did just recently, and this was in February, we collaborated to scale. And I think this is a really important point to labour on here, particularly for people building businesses. So again, learning from the lesson, the early days where I said, no, I didn't want a partner, I didn't want another investor. We partnered with a company out of London called Human, and Human were in a similar space. They were a digital, I guess, solution developer in marketing and communications and sales for the pharmaceutical industry. So they wanted a social media expert, and that was us. And they did a whole lot of stuff in the digital space, like building websites and all sorts of apps and stuff like that. We didn't do. And so it was a really good partnership. So we're in a revenue share, non-exclusive 2-year agreement in which we leverage each other, and we pitch them into our clients and they pitch us into their clients, and we each take a clip off the top. And it's worked really, really well. So in terms of revenue growth, I'm not worried about that. It's nice and steady. But the next thing we're doing is unlocking the revenue from our platforms, and that's now just starting to take off and grow. So it's kind of in an exciting space. What I'm trying to do is generate 2 or 3 revenue streams, some of them active as consulting and then others as more passive. And the more streams we've got, you know, delivering revenue over a number of either services or technologies, the healthier and the more sustainable the business will be. So exciting times. I'm really pleased about where we are right now.
That's great. A really smart move away from just selling time and obviously building up the IP that you can, earn from over the years.
Yeah.
What about FTE? How many full-time equivalents do you have now?
Yes. So now we've got, 6 full-time equivalents. And it's an interesting workforce. So a lot of the people that work for me have been with me for more than 5 years.
Yeah.
So it's an unusual workforce. Just about everybody in our business has a PhD or a master's degree of some sort, either in healthcare or science. And then on top of that, they've got marketing or business or data analytics or design qualifications. So they're very, very rare, and they're quite expensive in comparison.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how have you managed to retain them? That's a pretty good average, 5 years. So is something like you have an employee share scheme to keep people around, or?
Yeah, we do. We have an employee share scheme, and we have, I guess, an organisational culture that is interesting. So it's small things like from the beginning we had a work from home policy. So COVID has been almost like zero interruption for our business processes, which is really, really great. I guess, I'm a very out there feminist and very keen to encourage and build out diversity in my team. So when you look at the whole Opal team, we're almost 50-50. men and
Great.
women, and also from very different backgrounds as well. So we come with very different languages and different concepts and ideas, and we range in age from 20 to 55. So that's interesting. But also we have a number of really flexible workplace policies. So what I'm trying to do is build a culture in which people really, really enjoy coming to work. We have a couple of dogs that come into work on a regular basis. Yeah,
I'll bring Douglas
kids.
up to Melbourne and so he can
Go
meet
on.
them.
He would be so welcome. He would be so welcome. I put the office right across the road from my kids' school, so as they could come in after school, and everybody in the business knows that kids are welcome. Grandparents even drop in for a cup of tea every now and then, not mine, I might say, not my grandparents. So that's really great. But I think, this, as a small business, you've only got a few levers in which you can pull. If you don't have the money, you've got to really focus on culture. And so we do things, like we give everybody their birthday off. And it's not an annual leave day, it's just a day. And
I do the same thing with my offshore team. I've got 2 in the Philippines, 1 in Kenya. I think Peter's only going to learn about this policy now when he's editing this, but on their birthday, I pay them to take the day off, basically, and I think it's really important. But on the point of money, I'll get to why I asked about the share scheme in a minute, but money, as you probably know, often is ranked about the 5th reason in a lot of HR surveys why people work at a business. It's not... Money is just a hygiene factor. Obviously, you need to pay them, market rates. You need money to pay the bills, etc. But it's your vision, your purpose, how valued and trusted they feel, that they've got interesting and challenging work, and they don't work with a bunch of arseholes either. So, there's a lot of things ahead of the paycheck and even a share scheme that make people want to work where they do.
Yeah, we have a no dickheads policy. So this is part of the recruitment process, but it's also about clients. No, where did it come from?
Oh, the Sydney Swans. What was his name? Someone told me this on the cast. I'd already heard about the phrase, but I could see his face. The legend, St Kilda legend. Anyway, he was the coach of Sydney Swans for years. And
Paul
he had
Roos.
Paul Roos on the wall in the change rooms on the wall. He had it was no dickheads, and that was to stamp out a bit of obviously a dickhead culture around the time. But the New Zealand rugby team, the All Blacks, adopted that after reading a book where this was written about, and they had a no dickheads policy for a while. And I think it's genius.
It is. I like Paul Roos, so I like him even more now. So that's really cool. Yeah, no, we haven't, but we've occasionally sacked clients for being dickheads.
Good.
Yeah, I think you've got to do that. It takes a lot of courage to do it, but boy, it feels good when you do it.
Yeah, because if you don't, you're being myopic because your players are going to go, well, if Michelle's not going to stand up to this arsehole or dickhead, I'm not going to stick around. And that goes with team members as well, toxic team members. If you don't move them on when you know that they shouldn't be there, you're going to lose players.
Yeah. No, thankfully we haven't had that in terms of the team yet, but we've had to do it twice with clients.
Yeah, good. So the reason I asked about the share scheme, I sat in on a webinar the other week, Craig, who I've asked to come on the cast, and he'll be on here soon, on ESOPs, so employee share ownership plans. And they're quite tax effective here in Australia. But what really blew me away, it was something you said a minute ago about that retention, about average of 5 years, and you've only been going for 6, is that employee share schemes, the studies show almost double the average time a person will stick around. So it's 5.6 years, I think is the industry average. But if you've got an employee share scheme, it's 9.6 years for those companies. So it can be quite powerful to retain talent.
Wow. Yeah, I think that and having a chocolate drawer.
Yeah, well, you've got me there.
We have a chocolate drawer. Yeah. No, we have this chocolate. And we also have a policy, no cheap chocolate. So
that's good.
So it's Haig's chocolate all the way.
Well, I got in trouble this morning because my daughter going off to school, and I ate the last piece of Kit Kat last night because she knows there shouldn't be any chocolate in the house because Dad's going to eat it. And anyway, my God, was there a meltdown? And I said, sweetheart, you don't need to get upset. Don't get upset about things you don't really need to get upset about. We can just stop at the shop on the way to school and I'll replace it. So,
what were you thinking?
Exactly. Yeah. She doesn't often get upset. But I was saving that for school. I was going to take it in my lunchbox. So very cute. All right, we'll keep moving. When was the moment you felt like you'd succeeded?
Not yet there. Not there yet. I don't. Yeah, it's funny. You know, you have those small moments of success. I think
There's still a lot more.
juice in the tank. So success. I think success is really hard to define. But in terms of business, I'm not there yet. As a parent, I'm killing it. I'm doing a fantastic job there.
Right. Yeah. We might talk a bit about that later on in balance, but that's good to hear. What does success look like to you?
Success for me, this sounds a little counterintuitive, but I'm not particularly motivated by money.
Yeah.
I need it. I call it fun tickets, which my accountant doesn't think is very funny when I do that.
He doesn't think you can bank them?
Yeah, he just really worries about my language at times. But
Yep.
I think money's only part of the motivator here. And certainly for me, seeing an idea come to fruition is a big success. You know, finding that something you've built works. You know, that public recognition is not something I particularly value. No, that's not true. I do value it. I do, because social proof is always very valuable when you're a small business owner. But it's not a necessary component to my idea of my own success. And I guess, you know, this is the value of being, I guess, a small business owner as you get older. And I think it's one of the great benefits of being a bit older when you start up a business, is that you're not so much wedded to the idea of proof, social proof that you're smart, or proof that you can do what you say you're going to do or follow through or anything like that. Yes, success to me is, I find it very much from standing around on a Friday afternoon with my team and we're having a laugh about something. And we have this other thing where if we sign a new client, we do these crazy happy dances in the kitchen. I love doing those happy dances. And we have another thing, and it's a very feminine thing in business, and I'm sure lots of your female listeners will get this. We call it a lipstick and 6-inch heel moment. Yep. You know, when you've just won a big client and you're striding down Collins Street or whatever the main street is in whatever city, and you just feel so bloody incredible because you've just been able to pull off this big thing. So I don't think you arrive at success. I think you just taste it as you go along.
And I think it's important. I've failed at this early on in my career, a business career, but is to celebrate successes and wins and milestones. And I think a lot of some business owners don't see that or forget about it. And I think it's really important.
Yeah. We do a work in progress meeting every Monday morning, and we start off, and that's the first thing we do is we celebrate our moments. So that's the first thing we do every single week, is we start off with what happened last week and what's going to happen and what sort of celebration that you have. That's really important to do.
That's great. Adds a positive tone to the meeting. That's really good. And the week. Number one thing you'd recommend in marketing a fast growing business?
Understand your value proposition. So if you can't articulate what your value proposition is into really succinct sentences, you're going to have struggles marketing.
I totally agree. Some of my co-founders in the Distillers Institute were here just before this call with James Baker, who I'll probably have on the cast. We were going through the Strategizer framework or Canvas.
Yeah.
Are you aware of it?
I love those. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, today was my first introduction to it, and I was blown away. It just really clarifies your thinking. This is only the first step. It's going to take us weeks, if not months, to boil down. Even though we've got a business we launched 3 or 4 months ago, and we've got over 130 students in the first online course, this is so valuable for us right now, so we can fine tune not just our product offering, but also eventually when we roll back to marketing, changing the copy, etc. And it's so powerful, knowing your customers, what their needs, pains, and gains are. And so funding your business, you bootstrapped it. Any other funding sources, bank finance, grants? You're obviously listed on the ASX, so you've got investors now.
Yeah, I think one of the most important elements of financial sustainability in our business is probably around R&D tax incentives. Yeah. So I would encourage any businesses doing anything experimental at all in any industry to get advice around eligibility around R&D tax incentives. So Australia does have a really competitive incentive program for startups in this space. And people have a belief that it's quite difficult to navigate. It's not, but you do need help in this space. So I encourage that. And also things like the export
development marketing grants that are offered by
Austrade. Again, you can claim, I think, up to 2 years in this. And though you've got to spend a bit of money to make a bit of money, this is everything like social media and websites, they're all eligible underneath this. So we often say to our clients, every dollar you spend with us, particularly around social media, if it's experimental and it's going to help you in terms of marketing your service or your opportunity in overseas markets, it's all eligible. Go and have a look at it. It's not hard to do. So for us, it's been those two things. I wish I'd spent more time, and this is something that's still on my agenda now, looking at other government granting opportunities, because it's non-dilutive funding and it's a smart way to leverage the cash you've already got. So for a company like us right now, we've only got a cash balance at the moment of about $800,000. And so we've only got a market cap of about 3.5 million. We're in a really dangerous position as a small business. And so the last thing I want to do is go back to shareholders and further dilute. What I really want to do is either generate revenue or go find it from grant sources. So we're looking at things like ARC, Australian Research Council linkages grants. And we're also looking at things like innovation connections grants through Austrade. That's a fantastic organisation, Austrade. So I'm just going to give them a bit of a shout out there because they do great stuff in the healthcare sector. But also looking at some of your local councils. So we're not quite in the city of Melbourne, but we're on the wrong side of the street, quite literally. But the city of Melbourne, along with probably city of Brisbane, city of Sydney, Perth and Adelaide, everywhere, I'm sure that there are some small business grants. City of Melbourne has a fantastic small business grant that's about $30,000. And it's always been around, and it's very much to benefit businesses that are growing up in the CBD. But have a look at those small things there because I think they really work well.
Yeah, totally agree. Just on I think the audience would be interested to know, because given your numbers, your revenue's around 800, market cap's 3.5 million. I think a lot of people will be asking, how the hell can you be listed on the ASX? And you mentioned at the start, you're on the small cap. Maybe just talk a little bit to that and also your experience of being listed, because I think a lot of other people would say that'd be a fucking nightmare, or the paperwork and reporting, etc.
Yeah, it is a nightmare. It is a nightmare. But there's wonderful validation being a listed company when you hear from shareholders that are really happy about the way the company's developing. It's incredibly energizing to sort of get supporters from, out there prepared to put their own money on your back. It's a really great thing, but it's also a very heavy weight. So yeah, as I said, my background's working with the biotech industry. So if any of your listeners follow the biotech industry, you'll know that none of these businesses generate any revenue whatsoever. They're all loss-making. So they're highly speculative stocks. So we sort of sit in that space, and the same with mining companies. So a lot of the small resource miners are highly speculative, and we're also seeing this particularly in some of the technology stocks. So they're all loss-making. So we're actually a very unusual business because we have some revenue, which is a really big deal. And it's kind of exciting because where we are right now, the history of ShareRoot, it was listed on the stock exchange in December 2015, and they were loss-making. They've never been profit-making ever, though they've generated a little bit of revenue, and that was really in buying my business. But some years they were burning up to $6 million on research. Yeah. So it's kind of, I've got this, I actually literally have a little table that sits above my desk, and it goes back into the history of the business, and it shows this big downward sort of spike, and that's our expenditure. And then over the years, that has reduced and reduced and reduced. So now we're coming right now, literally this quarter, we're coming into cash flow neutral.
Great.
And it doesn't sound like a big deal, but that's one of my dancing in the kitchen moments. That's when you sort of say, now we're turning the business around. So where we've seen revenue go up was when my business was acquired, And each year that revenue has just gone up and up. So this funny little graph has gone from way down left, down low, and over time it's gone way up high to the right. So ideally what we're trying to do is create balance in the business. So as I said before, you know, the revenue generating part of the business is very much a legacy part of Opal rather. But where we're going to now is growing up the upside of the business. So you're seeing where we are, we're not unusual in the small caps. So a lot of the small caps are highly speculative. They're raising capital. They're spending it on research opportunities that will hopefully generate revenue further down the track. A lot of biotechs, the model of biotech is you spend a lot of money to generate revenue and then you sell intellectual property and then suddenly you get this big bolus cash injection into the business, which you invest immediately in more research opportunity. So I think I think I've been lucky to come from the biotech industry and understanding that business model and understanding the balance between a services or a product focused revenue generating business versus one that's building value through intellectual property.
Yeah, and it sounds like your shareholders are now grateful for their whiplash. A couple of questions around that, like what kind of cost is it to be listed on the small cap per annum? And secondly, and that's the small caps, was it under 25 million capitalization to be on that index?
Yeah.
Yep. And secondly, how many shareholders, do you roughly have?
Yeah, so it's actually very expensive. Well, I think it's very expensive to be listed on the Australian Stock Exchange. But having said that, it's cheaper than just about every other board, I think. And certainly, and you probably know this better than I do, Troy, there's probably a lot of companies that look at the ASX as an alternative to their home board. Because listing rules are probably different and the price is probably a bit lower. But on average, I think the cost of being listed is probably in the vicinity of about, I think I'm guessing here, I should really know this, but I think it's probably in the vicinity of at least $500,000.
A year?
So, yeah,
really?
A year.
Yeah.
So that's taking into account audit. So audit fees, this is not cheap to get that done. When you're a small cap, that's a big chunk of change out of the business. So we've had to be really careful, and I'm absolutely thrilled with the auditor that we've got now, William Buck. So shout out to those guys. They're amazing. When you think about, just all of the fees that go into directly to the ASX, but then all of the associated on costs. So when you run an annual general meeting, you've got to do a proper printed annual report. You've got to mail it out to every shareholder. You've got to mail out, notice of meetings. All of these have to be prepared by lawyers. It's just, it was an area of the business that it took me quite a few months to get my head around just what the real active on costs were of this, but it's also the cost of time. So the amount of time I spend dealing with listing issues, and that, I don't mean shareholders in this, because that's completely different, and that's an absolutely necessary part of my job. But just dealing with questions from the ASX, or if you put up an announcement and they don't like it, then you've got to change it, and then you've got to respond. All of those sorts of things. The compliance cost in terms of my time is probably about 10% of my total time.
Yep.
That's a lot.
And that is, absolutely. And what about average number of shareholders at the moment?
So average number of shareholders, we've just had a huge amount of change in our register just recently. So I can't actually tell you exactly how many shareholders we've got. But the amount of time that I spend speaking to shareholders, this is both a privilege to be able to spend time talking to shareholders, but also, a significant cost to the business. Because when you're talking to shareholders, you're actually not necessarily working on the business, but you're working for them. They own your business. They are the owners of the business. So you have an absolute obligation to speak to them. But in terms of investor relations, talking to shareholders, that probably takes up about 30% of my time. So when you think about it, really only about 50% of my time is actually spent in working on the business, and I'm still trying to keep my hands off from working in the business. I'm trying not to do that, rather than working on the business, which is a very different thing. And then, of course, managing the board. And so you've got to manage up in that way as well as manage media and all of the other things that come around a business that's listed. Being cheeky here, I wouldn't recommend being listed. It's a really different. Yeah, look, I kind of knew that, having been around a lot of small listed companies, and I worked for a small listed biotech many years ago. It's a tremendous burden, but it's also just so wildly exciting to be in that space. And you've got to be so careful not to watch the share price, because the share price is not a validation of what you're doing in the business. So you've got to really uncouple yourself from watching the share price and listening to day traders chat on some of these crazy platforms.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If you were to start up today with plenty of funding, would you go into industry?
Definitely, absolutely. Yeah, there's so much bandwidth, and it's so exciting to be in the digital health and the med tech industry. I could never see myself leaving this sector.
Oh, great. And can you outline the most stressful point in your small business growth journey so the audience can learn from it?
I think the most stressful point that has happened to me was definitely my business partner getting sick, and that was unexpected. It happened very quickly, and then having to scramble to cope. I think it was really the knock-on effect of that, and there was a couple of things. One was around learning to work in a very uncertain space, and having the responsibility of employees. In leadership, there's a real line of thinking around authenticity and vulnerability. And I think, yes, I agree with this, to be very authentic as a leader, and it is okay to be vulnerable. But I think there's a line in which we have to be very careful. The people that work with us as clients and also for us as employees, they want to see confidence and they want to see strength. You don't have to pretend all of the time. But, it was that thing that when I was at my very lowest and the most uncertain in the business, and it seems like a small thing, but it was actually a really big thing. Every morning I would get up and I would do my hair and put on makeup and get dressed and make an effort, because the way I walked in that door, if I didn't have that look on my face that it's okay, we've got this.
Scare the shit out of your team.
Yeah, exactly. It would scare the shit out of the team, but it would scare the shit out of me too. Yeah. I'd get into the bathroom and do that little self-talk in the mirror and say, for God's sake, pull yourself together. Stop telling everybody everything that's going on inside your head and start talking to somebody outside the business.
Yep.
So your employees are not your psychologist. And this is a hard lesson.
I can see that on a sticker on the back of a ute somewhere in Australia.
Yeah, exactly. But also, I'm very, very lucky. I have my first cousin who works with me in the business. So we're able to just switch into cousin talk and then switch back into business talk. So she knows that whenever I ring her, I always do it after hours or on a weekend, and I'll say, right, we're going to have a cousin talk about the business. And so she knows that it's in the vault. But it's that degree of, don't walk through the door and carry all the negativity into the space with you. Remember that, people, even if you don't know what the fuck is going on and you're really scared shitless, just walk in there and say, well, today we're just going to do our very best, and we're just going to put one foot in front of the other, and each hour, each day is hopefully going to be a way forward. Don't bullshit stuff, but also don't scare the shit out of them either.
That's good advice. Yeah. What area in business do you feel you had to work on the most to add the greatest value?
When I started, I would have said management accounting, but actually that's not true. So I think I actually have a lot more skills than I thought I did in that space. And so now when I look back, I would say the biggest area that I'm focused on working on now is probably around talent management.
Yeah.
It's funny that I think I'm a really warm and friendly person, and I'm really easy to get along with. But I think one of my great areas of growth that I should be looking at and it's not necessarily a weakness, it's just an area that I think I could really grow and get really quite a lot better in, is probably around managing people better. And to be really specific, it's having difficult conversations with people.
Yep.
So I'm very much of, spare the rod and praise the child.
Yep.
But in business, that's not always the most helpful thing to help people grow through difficult stages or uncertainty. And you do people a lot more favors if you actually tell them the truth about what's going on with their performance. This is really hard to do, and particularly in small business where we often have relationships that are, it's kind of more than business because it feels like a family. And I've stopped saying that. I used to say that, the Opal family, this is wrong. These people are not my family. They're not my friends. One is my family. She's my cousin. But I think we have to stop thinking like that, and that the way we manage people is so crucial in small business. And I think it's one of those areas where we assume we have a lot of skills, but we actually don't.
Yeah, I think there's a huge void of good training material out there for managers, particularly in small businesses. And as I like to say, people are the hardest thing in small business and where the value's at. Have you come across the Manager Tools podcast?
No.
It's my recommendation for anyone wanting to become a better manager. They started 16 years ago, just before I moved to London. And I know Mark, one of the co-founders, reasonably well. He comes out when he's they have conferences. When he's often in Melbourne and Sydney, he'll fly down to Tasmania and play some golf with Greg and Rod and a couple other friends. And we've got the Mark Twain Cup going, so oscillating between Tasmania and Mark lives in Texas. So we have a bit of friendly golf, but obviously listening to a lot of his casts over the years, very, very valuable. I remember saying to Mark that I found their casts about 6 months. They'd started 6 months before I moved to London, and I had to wait about 3 months for my wife at the time to finish her job before we could move. So I was in the gym a lot. I'd finished up with my company day to day, and just went through their back catalogue. And I said to Mark, I was listening to them talk about DISC, which is a behavioural framework like Myers-Briggs. It's the one that I use, DISC. And I said to Mark when we were playing golf at Barnbougle here in Tasmania once over dinner, I said, I distinctly remember when you spoke about DISC. So I'm a D, which is dominance, and the high Is, typically they're people-orientated extroverts. So they're very, like the sales roles, they're very chatty. And when he was describing the quadrants, and then particularly the next cast after the overview was talking about the Ds, I said, I can't remember which point it was, but when you were describing how I interact with Is, or how they affect or how I think about Is, I said it was literally a falling off the treadmill moment. I pretty much stopped running and nearly fell off the treadmill. It just hit me like a ton of bricks. Really? The way that, and made me change the way I thought, but also more importantly, how I behaved in my communication style. So, and they've got it's a weekly podcast. It's great. So you just go to manager-tools.com, and there's any problem you've had in business, whether it's dealing with someone in the workplace with body odor, they've got a cast on that. There is a heap of different casts that they cover in a lot of work situations from a manager's point of view, and also for direct reports. They've got career tools as well there. But I strongly recommend people listen to that, pick through the cast, go through their basics first. So talking about feedback, delegation, coaching, and one-on-ones. And it's helped me a lot in my last 10 or 15 years in business using their material.
Great tip. Thanks. I'll look at that.
What have you enjoyed least about managing fast growth?
The bit I enjoy least about fast growth would probably be around predicting out what's going to happen, and I guess people that really matter to you not believing in you, not believing in your technology. And I've learnt more and more not to take that on board and make it their problem, not my problem. Yeah. But that's probably the one thing that kind of still gets under my skin is that lack of faith. I think the other thing too is fast growth also requires you to think really fast as well, to be able to sort of really evaluate where you are. And I think for me, fast growth is also about learning to regulate yourself in that space. So I like to think of myself as a high functioning someone with anxiety in a way, but it's a really productive anxiety. But there's a certain period of time, I think, particularly when you're in a startup and you're going at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And I was doing this, I was working every night until about 2 o'clock in the morning and getting no more than about 4 hours of sleep. And then progressively over time, you can only do that for so many years, particularly when you've got kids and family. And it's a really, really bad message.
It is, and it's a bad strategy. I said earlier on the cast, I used to do that, think I could operate on 4 hours a night and just get to success through pure brute force. There are some people that can actually only operate in 4 hours a night, like Clinton, Margaret Thatcher was another one, who biologically can only need 4 hours of sleep. But if you're not a superhuman like that, it does wear you down. You know, I used to work 100-hour weeks, sleep under my desk sometimes, and it just catches up with you. You know, we need our quality sleep.
Yeah, I think it's so much about that. I was lucky last year. I went to New York. I was finishing off a global MBA at NYU Stern. This was through a tremendous program that Monash University has in Melbourne. It's a new program. And I got to meet Arianna Huffington.
Wow.
And yeah, I know. I totally blew my mind. I've always followed her on social media. I always have admired her acumen, particularly around media and building, you know, really profitable networks. But also
she's a big advocate on sleep, isn't she? 8
hours. Oh, truly. She told me off, you know, straight away. So I think I was probably the most excited person that day meeting her. So it was in this small group, only 30 people from Melbourne, and we'd all travelled up there. And we go into her office in downtown New York City. So I've got my best, you know, gear on, the high heels, the hair's done, because she looks $1 million. I don't know what, she must be in her, I'm not even going to say it publicly because she may reach through and just smack me. But whatever age she is, by God, she looks amazing. But it's not just looking amazing. She is amazing. She sounds amazing. She's as sharp as all get out. She's fantastic. Anyway, so we go in there in this beautiful, very funky startup office, exactly what you expect to see downtown New York, or actually it was uptown. And we get in there and she sits down and she's got this fabulous, quite sort of thick American European accent. And she started talking and she said, you know, straight up, she said, you know, many of you are small business owners or chief executives or entrepreneurs. And she said, you know, what's the most important thing? And we're all banging on about, you know, as sort of wanky MBAs can do sometimes, you know, talking about profit and loss and she goes, sleep is the most important thing. And of course, I'm kind of laughing on the inside because I had a hunch she was going to say something like this. But her thing is all about micro steps. So this is not making big, ambitious promises to yourself as I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that and I'm going to lose weight and I'm going to stop drinking and this is about small things, really, really small things that create small habits that then lead into bigger, better habits. And it just made sense. But she really focused on don't have your mobile phone beside the bed, you know, talk about sleep hygiene. Yeah, I know. So, and of course, that's actually a lot harder to do than it seems. Because I'm a bit addicted to my phone and my Apple Watch and all the other stupid gadgets I've got in my life. And we had these Thrive buddies. So this was a pal that we were checking in with each other every week to see if we were sticking to this. So my Thrive buddy, Steve and I, we still check in with each other and we still talk about sleep and sleep hygiene. So if there's a tip out there that, you know, getting 7 hours of sleep is actually really important because it does put you on your best performance. But she was wonderful. It was good advice.
Yeah, that's a great story. And out of interest, where did you do your happy dance after meeting her?
Oh, I was happy dancing. I was happy dancing for weeks after meeting her. That was so exciting. And then I wrote a blog after meeting her, and I published it on LinkedIn, and I tagged her in it, and then she responded to it, and then I'd put it on Twitter as well, and then she retweeted it.
Wow.
So then I got like about 2,000 new followers in 24 hours on Twitter.
That's great.
Because the great Ariana Huffington had retweeted me. So that was like that's my brush with fame. Like, other people can say they've met famous soccer players or movie stars. They don't interest me. My brush with fame would probably be politicians and business leaders.
Yeah. And what do you love most about growing a small business?
The thing I love most about growing a small business would be around making every decision on your own and being able to fail and fuck up without anybody watching. And that's kind of nice. So I kind of feel you can be more experimental. Yeah, no, you can. You can literally find, I call it the cover your ass drawer, where you put all of that sort of stuff in it. But, having worked in healthcare organizations and very big businesses, it's very, very hard to screw up and not get punished for it. Even though I've worked in the innovation industries, and you think that innovation would be all about screwing up and experimenting, it's actually not true. That there's a lot of organizations, particularly big ones, that actually don't give much space for this kind of, thinking the unthinkable and just having a go anyway. And Australia in particular is really hard on people that screw up, and that we don't often give each other a second chance around this. Yeah. So I guess that's the beauty of being in small business. When it's your thing, you can do whatever the hell you like. And
absolutely.
I can't quite do that now in a listed company because you've got shareholders to respond to, but to a large degree I can still do that, because that's what you can do in the small cap world.
Yeah. Yep. What's been the biggest mindset shift for you in your small business growth journey?
I would like to think the biggest mind shift for us has been, and particularly me, has been to shift from, I guess, a growth mindset to a transformational mindset.
Yeah.
And I know the word transformation is very sort of, cute and, glitzy these days. But genuinely at the heart of it is, as a leader, I want to be transformational. I would love it if one day people would look back and say, Michelle had a very experimental mindset in which she was prepared to have a go at stuff, but she was able to transform and take something from here and shift it into something over here and add significant value to it along the way. So I guess that's how I'd like to be seen, as somebody that's capable of transformation. I'm not interested to be in a business where you just throw the arm over and do it again each year, and you do the same thing, and then you get into this pattern. And I guess, I think that the value that I bring to a business is I like to experiment and I like to do things different as time goes on. And I can never feel completely content that we've got it. I keep thinking, but if we did it a different color, or if we put these extra nuts and bolts on it, or what if we put it in, Singapore, what would happen there? So I like to think of, it's not just about those incremental innovation points. It's genuinely being quite creative and saying, let's think the unthinkable. What if we could do it like this? That would be amazing. I guess too, as I've got older, I like to think that I've become far more ambitious over time. So I feel like, and I think this happens particularly to women as they get older. I think they become less concerned about what people think and start really listening to their ambitious voice and going, you know what, I'm just going to do it anyway.
Yep.
And I like that. So there's something very special, I think, about women in their 40s and 50s who are on an entrepreneurial journey, or as I like to say, a small business journey. Not everybody's an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I think this is a really fantastic time for women, because we've sort of got that I just don't give a shit attitude anymore.
Yep.
And also we know that if we're in our 40s and 50s, we know that women's working lives are not as long as most men. And so you've got to really be hitting your peak earning capacity at around, 50 to 55. And then to be able to leverage that into your 70s, you need to have that really solid foundation of growth.
Yeah. What's the number one habit you think a small business owner needs to develop and maintain?
This is easy to answer, and my brother gave me this answer, and it's fanatical discipline.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's got it written on a sign above his desk. He used to call me Mrs. Make Do, because everything was, oh yeah, that'll do. All right, get it done. And I used to have this thing, don't let perfect get in the way of done. And
Yep.
and he would go, no, you're wrong. I don't want you to be a perfectionist, but you need to be fanatically disciplined. And this is particularly around financial sustainability and, you know, the cleanliness of your accounts, to make sure that you've got a complete handle on where the money's coming in and where it's going out, but also in terms of consistency about the way you speak to clients and customers. It's about following up an inquiry quickly, very quickly, to be able to get it across the line. It's about having that consistency with your staff, the people that work for you, and the contractors that you have around you. But I think it's fanatical discipline. So I have this little self-talk that I do in my head. There's always a point where I want to give up on something. There's always a point. And whether it's out walking with the dog and I think, oh yeah, I'm not going to go that way, I'm just going to cut back home, I'll go, nah, come on, you know, the jet is off the tarmac, keep the jet up.
That's good.
Do it, keep going. So it's I think it's that, you know, I think it's coaching yourself, having that self-talk to be able to go, no, let's just get to the bottom of this. Let's just do it now, because if I put it off, it's just not going to happen. Let's just do it now.
I love that Jim Rohn quote, discipline is the bridge between goals and accomplishment.
Oh.
Do you love talking small business growth with other owners? We have a vibrant online community from many industries around the world. Plus, we regularly add new tools and resources for community members and host 2 webinars a month to help you grow your small business. growsmallbusiness.com. Can you talk how you added people to the team, some wins, mistakes, and advice for those listening?
Yeah, I've only ever done one really catastrophic hire, and it really crippled the entire business. And it was, again, right at that point where my business partner got sick. And I hired a very, very talented young woman. She was incredible, and culturally didn't quite fit into my team. But she just had a lot of value. What I didn't understand at the time was she was going through some very, very difficult personal circumstances, and I wasn't aware of that. And then something went wrong. I did her the disservice of retrenching her in the end. I wasn't even honest enough to sack her. So I retrenched her, which crippled my business because I wasn't able to rehire somebody in that space. And I didn't really understand what that meant, to be really honest. But also I robbed her of the ability to grow, and I robbed myself of the ability to grow with her. And the outcome is she and I are still quite good friends on the outside. So she's one of my cheerleaders out there, and, you know, the back blocks, and I'm one of hers as well. And we had a very honest conversation afterwards, and it was many years afterwards though. And I said, you know, I really robbed you of the opportunity to really learn through that. I should have held your feet to the fire. And I behaved like the typical mother hen. I took it off her and said, look, let me do it. I can do it. You know, just forget about it. And then I blamed her for that. So I didn't wear the blame myself. And I guess, you know, that's one of my biggest learnings. And I think one of my greatest regrets too in business, that she is very talented. She's incredibly high value. I didn't understand her personal circumstance, and I didn't even try. And I robbed her of that opportunity to grow.
Yeah, that's why I lead in with my weekly one-on-ones when I have direct reports. Again, this is what I got from Manager Tools, was to have one-on-ones, 30 minutes with each full-time direct. But the one question I start with is, how are you going? Because it's a very good open question, and often it teases out someone's on the brink of, they want to raise something with you, shit's going on at home or whatever. And that one question can be the difference between them going, okay, I'm in a safe space, and I'm, you know, my manager is actually going to listen to me. And I've found that has saved me being a jerk many, many times over, because I haven't understood some shit's going on outside of work, and you do need to cut people some slack and show them some support. And unless you have that regular meeting and communication with them, often you don't find out.
Yeah, good comment.
Um, and sorry, you said, was her hire or exit around the time when your business partner became unwell?
Yeah, it was the perfect storm. She came into the business a couple of months before my business partner became unwell.
Yeah.
And then she was there sort of to see the mess and the duration, sort of, all of the chaos around that. And I didn't have the emotional bandwidth to be able to help her or support her.
Yeah.
And so, I frankly, I did the cowardly thing. I just sort of went, look, I'm going to retrench this position and thanks very much. I had a client that was really unhappy. And I kept going, I'll look after that client because, it was a really big client. And in the end, I totally screwed up that client. I did not do a good job with the client. They got their value, but, it wasn't good.
Yeah.
And it's certainly a significant regret. So, timing was just off.
Yeah.
But also at the time, I wasn't very good at asking for help.
Yep. That's just common, I think, with business owners. What are some things you'd recommend to building a sustainable and kick-ass culture to help with the growth?
It's kind of hard to unpick, isn't it? Like when you look at a culture, I'm very conscious that every day we're building a culture. Yeah.
The short answer is Labradors.
Labrador. I have to tell you, it's like a thing. It comes up in job interviews. So, do you like dogs?
Do you like dags?
And it's kind of like, do you like dogs? Or does your dog bite? It's always that moment where you kind of go, if they're dog people, they're definitely in. If they're not dog people, we'll use them as a contractor. Maybe we'll keep them on the outside. So there's that. Yeah, there's definitely that. I don't know. I really enjoy diversity in our team. I love the fact that I try very hard to recruit not in my own likeness. And it's actually really hard to do, to be able to recognize your own bias and try and recruit around it.
Absolutely.
I really enjoy sitting around the kitchen. We've got a big open plan office, and the kitchen table is kind of our meeting space, and we often sit down and eat lunch together as a whole team.
That's good.
And it seems like a very, the parent, I don't make them do it. But I just make sure that I'm preparing really nice smelling food, and then I kind of smell them out, and then they come out and go, oh, what are you cooking? And I'll say, oh, it's just delicious. Do you want some? So I think there's that. I try to talk about stuff other than work around the kitchen table. So we have this huge conversation around movies and books and kids, and it's about giving employees the opportunity to talk about as much life as they want to, that they feel comfortable talking about, and knowing that people have boundaries as well. But I often find sitting around the kitchen table, in old times, businesses would be having a beer on a Friday night, or I know my dad's business, he used to have a barbecue. And he had probably at one stage, about 15 employees. And he was in an engineering business. And he used to fire up the barbecue at about 4:00 on a Friday. And just the smell of sausages, I think there's something very olfactory about getting people to come around and talk. But my dad's Irish, and so he was very invested in the social aspect of business. But he used to say to us kids, because we were never allowed to work in my dad's business, we had to work in some other parent's business, because he said we had nothing to offer him. So he always got rid of us. But if it was about cooking the barbecue, and he would invite other people that worked for him, for their kids to come in after school and have a sausage with us, and he would put on the beers, and it was just that time. And then he'd kick everybody out promptly at 5:00 on a Friday and say, right, piss off, get rid of, and the barbecue would be off, and it'd be left up to my brother and I to clean the barbecue.
Yeah, that's good.
It was, I guess it's that philosophy of generosity, as well as allowing people to bring as much of their real life to work as they want. Yeah.
Tell our audience how you've handled balance.
Not very well. So I'm only learning to do that. So this is my first year of doing this well. And I have to say credit to Ariana Huffington and the Thrive program, because I thought that was really cool. I've been really bad at balance. So some of my closest friends will tell you that I'm an extremely bad role model when it comes to this sort of stuff. So, it plays out very much in your personal health, but it plays out on your relationships with family first.
Yes.
So I've got two amazing teenagers. They are genuinely brilliant humans, both of them, and I'm so ridiculously proud of them. I actually like them.
Yeah.
It's unusual to say that you actually like your teenagers, but these two I actually really, really like. They're really good humans and they're fun to be around. So it's creating the time. And when we were starting the business, because there was just so many hours spent doing that, my kids really suffered in that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it played out on them. And, thankfully they're in middle school, and I started to get my act together before my son started his final year at school. But I have a really great relationship with my kids now. And they're the ones who will often say, Mum, you look like shit. You really need to go and get your hair done. Or, you are not going out with those jeans on, please take them off. It's quite lovely that the kids all pull me up now.
Yeah.
I think my kids are really proud of me. And to me, it's funny when you said about what success is, I guess my kids' response to me is a big deal. What I'm trying to do, being coached by my 18-year-old daughter, is not to tie my identity to my business success. And it's kind of hard to do that when you're in small business.
It is very hard.
It's really hard to do that. So, it plays out very directly there. And also because I've got parents that reinforce my small business success, that kind of doesn't help. But yeah, I guess it's the end of the day. This year I'm committing to spending more time with my mum.
Yep.
So my mum's really cool. She's been the enabler in the family. And so she's not well and she's very frail these days. And so I desperately want to be with her. And also my daughter's doing her final year at school. So she's just about to go into exams in the next few weeks. And she's had a really good year this year despite COVID. And so I'm really committed to being there for her until December. I think for me, it's balance. I'm probably the last person you should talk to about balance. I'm sure if any of my family or any of my friends are listening to this podcast, they would be literally
on the floor,
screaming, laughing. They would be on the floor and pouring themselves another gin.
Yeah. What do you have any hobbies to help with the balance?
See, this is the problem. So I used to. So I love painting and drawing, and I haven't done that in probably 10 years. Yeah. And
it's so important though to have that creative outlet, or even it's gardening or bushwalking, switch your mind off, and you do problem solve better at work when you do non-work stuff. I learnt that far too late, but
I think when you allow your mind to be creative, you actually become sharper at problem solving.
Yes,
so definitely. The more time you spend in those creative spaces, and I love walking. So I'm a big walker, and so I've just started walking. So today is my 17th day in a row where I've walked for 40 minutes a day. So I'm a bit proud of myself. Thanks for asking.
No, that's great. And I'm a big walker as well, bushwalk with Douglas, my chocolate Labrador Carlton supporter. And that's where I do a lot of my PD, which is the next question, professional development. I'll listen to audiobooks and podcasts, and it's great. How much professional development have you invested in yourself?
Tons, literally $100,000 worth. So I've just finished a global executive MBA through Monash University, which is a stunningly good program. So that was done through France and Germany last year, and then through China in the middle of last year, and then the last bit was at NYU Stern in New York, so Stern Business School. And the Gemba, it's funny because I applied to do an MBA probably back in about 2008, but it wasn't to be at that time. And then I applied again, probably about 2010, and I still didn't do it. And so I finally did it. And so I just literally the change in my thinking,
Yep.
particularly in terms of my strategic skills, but also in terms of those implementation and core functional skills around business. It's off the charts compared to where I thought I was good before this. But yeah, wow, it's just completely blown my mind about this. And as I said, in my team, I've got a whole bunch of PhDs and masters. You know, one of them has a PhD in cancer biology and the other one is a PhD in sports science, and they're fantastic. And so every year we talk about professional development, and that's what we were doing today, actually, before this call. And I always ask my team, so what are you going to learn this year? And I'm always pushing them to do more, to do more, to do more. So I think there's a big opportunity around formal education, and there's an equally big opportunity around mentorship and industry experience as an educator.
Well, that's my next question.
So, I think it's critical to success. Absolutely. If you're in a business and you don't have a forward development plan, you're not going to be in business.
Totally agree. Well, that's my next question, though. Mentors or coaches along the way?
Oh, I've had some brilliant mentors and coaches along the way. So I used to have this fantastic mentor who used to be my boss years ago, and I call him the King of Silence. So everybody's got a nickname in my life. Anyway, the King of Silence. So I've got one's called the Prince of Darkness and the other one's called the King of Silence. So the King of Silence is great because he did kind of what you do. He would say, so what are we going to talk about this time, Michelle?
Yeah.
And then there would be this deafening silence and I'd have to fill in the gap. And I ended up telling him stuff that I had no plan of revealing whatsoever. So he was wonderful. He was really great, particularly at encouraging me around my relationships within the industry and reinforcing the importance of network. So networking is a business critical task. So it's not social, it's business critical. And he was wonderful at getting me to see that. And I think the Prince of Darkness was the other great mentor that I had. And he was always the one telling me about why my ideas were fantastic, but they were going to fail. And so then he would sharpen my persuasion skills. And he was very, very good. And then the current mentor that I've got right now, he doesn't have a name. I should give him a name. He's been very good at telling me when to stop doing something. And,
that's good.
And I've loved that about him. But I guess too, one of my greatest mentors obviously is my family. They're very big in this space. But I also consider my kids to be brilliant mentors. I've got another young woman that I mentor, and she kind of works in an aligned industry that potentially could be a competitor to me. And she's about 20 years younger than me. And she's introducing me to ways of thinking and some technologies that, being in my early 50s, I'm just not seeing. But she's seeing. She also comes from a background. She's from the Middle East. You know, she's very different to me in every single way. And I love that her language and the way that she looks at life and family and business is very, very different. So I guess we mentor each other, but I tend to think I get more out of it than what she gets out of me.
That's good. Just back on your Prince of Darkness comment, where he said, brilliant idea, but it's going to fail. I had a good friend of mine, Tim Polmier, on episode 5. He and Beck, his wife, started Flat Tummy Tea in 2013, and I'd sat on a business panel, and they came second. We're having a beer afterwards, you know, the judges and the people up on the pitching, and I said to Tim, you know, I don't know everything about small business, but I've made a fuck ton of mistakes. Happy to grab a beer once a month and help you avoid some of those if you're interested. And he said, yeah, that'd be good. And I said, but I will let you know up front, I don't think your business is going to work. I don't understand your market. I don't believe in the product, but happy to help if I can. 2.5 years later, he turns up at our next meetup and with a bottle of nice wine, and as a thank you, because they just sold out for $10 million. So I was very wrong on that one.
That's so great. That's a cool story.
You've obviously got a board of directors. Can you talk a little bit about that? Any advice for those out there? And you mentioned earlier that a board of advisors might have been a good move at the start. Yeah,
I really wish I'd done that sort of closer to the start, because I think, they give you the permission and the space to talk about the business rather than working just in the business.
Yeah.
And sometimes they can bring that sort of clarity. I'm really lucky. The chairman that I've got in the business, Dr. Julian Chick, he and I have known each other for 20 years on and off. And the trust relationship between the two of us is really fantastic. It's important to also recognise that we're not friends. That we have a really good relationship with each other, but it's not friendship, and so you've got to be really clear about that. So I'd really advise you not to choose friends. Years ago, when I was chief executive of the Bio Melbourne Network, which is the Biotech Industry Association in Victoria, I asked a very close friend of mine who's also in the biotech industry, an incredibly successful woman, and I asked her to be on the board of Bio Melbourne, and she said no. She said, I would not be on your board because I want to be your friend.
Yes.
So I think this is a really important point here. So you've got to maintain that professional distance between you and the board. They're there to pressure test you. They're there to say, no, why would that work? And they're there to sort of be that cognitive dissonance, why things work really well is when you've got that. Yeah.
It's good corporate governance. Ask the hard questions and holds you to account. And it's a very, very important mechanism, even in a small business where it can be an informal board of advisors, but having that mechanism adds a lot of value.
Yeah, I think the added thing too, particularly with the chairman that I've got, Julian, I know he won't let me fall.
Yeah,
I know he's got my back, and he will not let anything happen to me in that space. And so it's really rare. Very few listed company chief executives have this kind of relationship with their chair. Yeah. So I'm very lucky. This is one of the best business working relationships I've ever had in my life. It's just absolutely brilliant. And then the other two board members are very much subject matter experts. I didn't know them before coming into the business, and so I've learnt to work with them, which is really great. And I really appreciate, again, the diversity. They come from a very, very different technical background to me. They have a very different way of looking at our problems. They bring very different viewpoints. Sometimes I don't like it, and sometimes it's really challenging, but I think, that's when you know that it's working.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Michelle, we're on to our final 5 questions. What do you think is the hardest thing in growing a small business?
Cash management.
Yep. And favorite business book which has helped you the most?
Best business book is probably, I can't remember the name of the author, but I think it's called Difficult Conversations. But the other one I do love too is The Goal. Have you read The Goal?
Yeah, so Difficult Conversations, Bruce Patton, Douglas Stone, Sheila Heen.
Yes.
And The Goal is a great book. I think it was written in the 80s. It uses a bit of a manufacturing story, It is a superb book. I listened to it as an audiobook when I was up in Byron Bay, actually. I remember distinctly. And that was really powerful. Yeah. Any great podcasts or online learning tools you use for your own professional development?
No, I don't really. I don't really tap into that sort of stuff. I think the thing that I find the most valuable for my professional development would be Twitter.
Yep. Great.
And listening outside my bubble as well. So I deliberately listen to voices that I don't agree with, because I don't want to live in a confirmation bubble. But also in terms of keeping up with current thinking, with collaborators, with competitors, and just sort of understanding the forward space that I'm in, I could not live without Twitter.
Yeah. And one tool you'd recommend to help grow a small business?
Oh, those strategy canvases, Strategizer. There's a really good book, and it's called, what's it called? Oh God, I'm terrible. I've got brain like a sieve. It's a book that's about value proposition design, and it actually looks like a cartoon book, but it's linked to those Strategizer canvases. What are they called?
No, Michelle, it is literally sitting on my kitchen table downstairs, because James left us with 3 books, and that was one of those 3 books. But we'll get the right title and put it in the show notes so we can link through to it so people can see it. Yeah,
that's a great book. And I remember my daughter was doing drama or something, and it was every Tuesday and Thursday night, and I used to sit in the car waiting for her for an hour and I would read that book and write notes, and that's massive impact, that book.
Yep. And finally, my favorite question, what would you tell yourself on day one of starting out?
Go hard.
Now that's Paul Roos.
Yeah. It does. It's funny because I'm actually a Collingwood supporter. I'm
I'm
not ashamed to say it.
How did you make it on the show?
I didn't say that until the end.
I know.
Carlton, I wasn't going to tell you that until right at the end.
Douglas even has his own Carlton jersey,
Really? Really?
Yes.
Oh, how funny. I called my kid Nathan after Nathan Buckley.
Oh, you are sad on so many levels.
It's actually true. No, I didn't actually call my kid Nathan because of Nathan Buckley.
Right, sure.
But I do like Nathan Buckley a lot.
Yeah. I've got a funny quick story. I know we've gone well over, but good friends of mine in Melbourne, Tina and Pato's a Carlton supporter. Tina doesn't really follow the football, but their son was going to swimming lessons, like private lessons in someone's backyard pool. And there was one other kid there, and after the swimming lessons, Tina would come home and go, God, our kid's getting his ass kicked by this other kid in swimming lessons, same age, but he's streets ahead. Anyway, it turns out it was Nathan Buckley's son.
Oh, wow. That would be pretty cool. I'd be excited about that.
Well, thanks for your time today, Michelle. Great to have a chat and learn about your journey. And it sounds very exciting, and you've had a lot of successes along the way, and well done. And particularly for the adapting and learning that you're doing as you go, and not just as a CEO and business owner, but also manager, and well done to yourself and the wider team.
Thanks very much. Thank you for having me. I feel very honoured to be invited.
Oh, thanks, Michelle. We could have talked for another 2 hours easily, I think, but we both better crack on with some things.
No, we could. Thanks very much.
That's it. Thanks for listening. Please leave a review in iTunes or whatever platform you listen to us on. It means more small business owners will find our cast and help people with their business growth journey.